I think I'm not, maybe I should have done a presentation on the QCTO. Some people have actually had it, others might not have. And maybe let's start over there. And it's a pity, Steve, that I didn't come and do the actual presentation. In terms of the QCTO, in 2009, the NQF Act was promulgated and repealed the SAQA Act. And that made the QCTO the body that will look after quality assurance of vocational education and training, the sector that obviously guide training, etc. falls into. And QCTO have a unique way of doing things different to the way SAQA did it, but similar at the end of the day. So if you take qualification development, they use different terms, it's the same thing at the end of the day. As much as one of their consultants one day on a overhead presentation wrote about 100 times my DQP is not an SGB, etc., etc. It amounts to the same thing at the end of the day. It's a group of industry experts that will get together to determine what a qualification should look like, period. Now, how we put that group together is essential, because you're not going to have a scenario, as much as we say that the nature guide industry is separate to the culture guide industry, is separate to adventure guide industry. You can imagine how difficult a task it would be to ultimately have 8 nature qualifications, 8 adventure, 8 culture. If the industry says that's what's needed, and you have the funds and the process to drive it, go for it. That's fine. However, if you're pragmatic about how things are supposed to be, chances are we'll probably look at the way we've done it, where you have a qualification that has specializations. So there's a common part. Because the point is, and Fred, in terms of answering what the question that was asked of you, is somebody who's a guide has certain duties and responsibilities they'll all do. So as the official said, saw people greeting people at our Tambo. Whether I'm a culture guide, an adventure guide, or a nature guide, I'm going to fetch my guests at the airport. They come in from Germany or America, wherever they come from, I'm fetching them there. The oak may want to go to Kimberley to the Maloof Cup. But on the way to Kimberley, he might say, can I see some of the attractions in the country? And that's the difficulty with guiding, is to try and categorize it and specialize it the way we've done in the last few years. Maybe where we're causing some of the problems in the industry. So that's something that as industry you've got to look at, not me. We've never been, and that's the one thing I must say about any seater. If any seater tells you to do something because they want it done, then there's a problem. It's got to be done because there's a reason why it is done at the end of the day. So yes, the qualifications might look in a particular way, it might be difficult to understand. The reason for that is it's got to be benchmarked. You can't tell somebody he's a level 4 guide, education level 4 guide. And the plumber is an education level 4 plumber, but they have different competencies and abilities to do things. Because that's how you determine an education level, is you look for the commonalities, you look for things that somebody needs to do in their sphere, but that would talk to obviously a set of competencies. And that's why maybe the qualification sits the way it does. Qualifications were drafted by some people, some of you sitting in the room were part of the original qualifications that were drafted. So if, for instance, the tracker unit standard sits at level 6 and the guy can't read and write, it's not my fault. It's you who said this thing should sit at level 6 because it's a complicated task. Is it a complicated learning intervention? Is the question that should have been asked at the time. The task might be complicated, yes. But in terms of learning intervention, does it qualify for somebody to get the equivalent of a university degree? Because that's what that unit standard was pegged at. So what did it do? It said to everybody who's an expert tracker, sorry, you can't get a piece of paper because you don't have what it takes to meet those particular. We didn't say that. Industry set those particular standards and requirements. So it's a good lesson for us going forward when we sit as the QCTO in terms of the processes to be sure that we do these things correctly. Now, even under the QCTO process, remember that as the systems evolved, there'll be checks and balances in place to make sure we don't repeat some of these mistakes. The one thing we have to remember is that where traditional education has been with us since before Christ, the current system was with us since the year 2000. And 7 years later. In fact, if you go into QCTO research, 2 years later, they started doing research and said, oh, the system's not working, let's change it. It hadn't even been implemented, but they were saying it's not working. So when the QCTO as an entity started coming to CETAs, coming to people and saying, this is what we propose, and people interacted and said, hey, hold on, we've moved forward. We now do this, we do that, we do that. The consultants didn't take it kindly. No disrespect to consultants. They didn't take it kindly because for them it was, oh, we're protecting our turf, we're trying to challenge them, etc., etc. Bottom line, QCTO has been busy implementing itself since 2007. We now sit at the end of 2012, because we're at the end of 2012. It still has not implemented. It finally registered its first qualification about a month ago. But that's a fundamental qualification, so it's good. It's just fundamental competencies that somebody must have to allow them to study at a particular level. So there's no qualification that's QCTO registered that has any industry or whatever attached to it. And the reason for that simply is that they were trying to force something onto a society that wasn't ready for it. We needed to engage, we needed to understand, we needed to see who's by the means to do these things. Now let's talk about the guide qualification and compare it to something that does exist. When your child or you wants to become a chartered accountant, you've got to do a BCom degree, you've got to do your articles, your honors, and then you write the board exam. And SAICA, as a professional body, which is what needs to happen out of this process, we need to get a professional body that's going to look after the industry. As we said to Fagasa in 2009, somebody needs to take charge of doing something in this particular industry. So SAICA is the body that looks after chartered accountants. Only chartered accountants, not a BCom graduate. So at chartered accountant level, you become a member of SAICA. You also now have the option of 1 or 2 other bodies, international bodies, that operate in South Africa. But in order to become a member of that particular body, you must have succeeded in the board exam. So who sets the board exam? SAICA, together with the institutions, sets the board exam. They fund it, they deal with the processes around it, etc. The other thing that SAICA does is, as an entity, it goes to the universities who offer the BCom qualification and says to them, show me what you do, show me your curriculum, so that I can see whether it meets my requirements. And can I tell you that only 13 of the South African universities who offer BCom have met the SAICA requirements. 15 haven't. So if your child goes to that university, he can study BCom, no problem. He's not going to write the board exam until he's done something else. So SAICA don't recognize those institutions. As simple as that. Now, let's extrapolate that and put it into this particular industry. So you form an industry association. Are you going to have the funds to form one for field guides only and do all of those duties? If we do that, are we not going to be neglecting adventure guiding? Because maybe there's not as many people who are into that, but it's a growing. Are we not going to be neglecting culture guiding? So maybe you say, yeah, screw them. Let's go it on our own. That's fine. What's the implication for you as a nature guide? Is that bus of tourists going to come, stop at the game park, and you put them onto the trucks and take them on a nature excursion? Because you haven't looked after the culture side now. And then the culture side is probably where the person comes into the country. Because the nature guide is a part of his experience in the country. They don't come here specifically, well, not all of them, come specifically to just go to the Kruger Park. Or they come here to go to Sun City and from there go into the park. They come here to go to Cape Town and visit the park there. They might want to go to the southern part of the country and do the whole coast and park story. But they come as a tourist, not as a nature tourist or a culture tourist. There are very few people who come here specifically saying, I'm coming into South Africa to do X or Y. Initially, they'll come into the country to see South Africa. And when they come a second, maybe a third, a fourth time, they now decide, I want to specially do X, Y, or Z. Maybe then he's a nature client only, because he's decided, I've seen Kruger, I now want to go down, I want to see the Richtersveld, etc., etc. Or he might come in and say, I've seen Cape Town and the Boer Kaap and all of the Malay culture and the winelands and whatever, and I want to see what the culture of Durban is. But initially they come in as a tourist. So we cannot be looking at splintering what we offer at the end of the day. It's one industry. We always use the example, the skill has got its specializations. When I climb onto a horse, I'm riding a horse. The context of riding that horse could be at Turffontein, could be in Kyalami to do a show jumping, or it could be at Marikana to control guys who are shooting at me. I'm still riding a horse. The skill remains the same. I'm still a guide. I come in and I take people's money and I give them an experience. The biggest challenge as we see it, and this is the SETA's role, is over the years we've been accused of everything. Not a problem. Big shoulders, we deal with it. But there's a lot of stuff that hasn't happened from an industry point of view that has let the system down. Any qualification is generic in nature. So it says you must perform the following skills. No qualification, not even in management, tells you that in order to be a manager of the Radisson Blue Hotel, it says to be a manager. It might not even say to manage a hotel. It just says manage an entity. Do an MBA. Doesn't say MBA in managing a mining company. It's a general qualification. The context in which you use it changes. And that's what you have to go and find out. Any job you go into, you start on day one. You know the technical side of the job, no problem. You've still got to get to know the actual company ethos. Now in a guiding scenario, we have a qualification that says, what are the 5 flagship species of this park? It changes from park to park. Not all parks have the big 5. But nowhere in the qualification have you put in the content that that person's got to cover to know what's important to tell a tourist about an elephant. And if we did put in content, it could be content from 1999. Details around elephants have changed drastically since then. Who updates that? Industry's got to decide that. I've sat with the registrar of guides and said to him, who's going to do these things? The previous registrar just put his head in the sand, and I'll tell it to his face as well, and blamed theatre and said, I'll give you concessions. There's no qualification that exists for overland guides, for this, for that, for that. Where? It existed all along. You just didn't want to see it. And you guys prepared to say, but hold on. There's legislation we've got to implement. How do we do it? How do we register people? What do we need to do? And the process is, let's do all these things. So as we go and we start looking at how we implement the QCTO and its processes, at the same time, let's look at some of these other things. Let's look at not just drafting a qualification that's generic in nature. And QCTO talks about registering a curriculum with the qualification. So here's an opportunity for us to start putting some of these things into it. So the content that Jenny teaches her guides in her thing versus what a provider working under grants license teachers is different. Whose fault is that? Is it our fault as Cathsita? Is it your fault? I don't think it's anybody's fault. It's a gap that exists that we've got to address. It's as simple as that at the end of the day. So I think the point I'm trying to make is it's a joint effort, ultimately, on all fronts. SACWA as an entity will remain. So you want to know what SACWA is going to do? They're going to register qualifications going forward. They won't deal directly with us as Cathsita. They'll deal with QCTO once all of that's implemented. There's lots of work to be done around the QCTO. It's starting to happen. Professional body registration is a process on its own. We've got to get some professional body going in this particular sector. And the implications of being a professional body are that you'll do various things, set standards, whatever, but you won't be involved in the training of those particular standards. Now already there's a couple of challenges, because SACWA have registered 1 or 2 professional bodies, and I'm saying, hold on, you've registered them as a professional body, half of their members own schools. How did you jump through that particular hoop? And they're not answering us on that particular thing. So there are a couple of challenges that still exist, even though they've put the system in place. But it's like anything, guys. Something on paper works brilliantly. Ask the QCTO consultants. 5 years later, we're still trying to implement their brilliant paper. Simple as that at the end of the day.